Hello everyone. I'm going to talk to you for a minute about how you can set up your fabric for your drapery drawing. So you want to find a piece of fabric that's a solid color, all white, all black, all blue, doesn't matter. As long as it's solid, there's no print on it. And you also want a fabric that's fairly smooth, like a cotton fabric. You don't want anything that has a lot of added texture to it. So no Sherpa or crocheted fabric, because you don't want to have to worry about the texture when you're drawing. You just want to have to worry about the values and the shading. So one thing you can do, this turned out pretty well here. I just took a white sheet and I hung it from the rack, the towel rack in the bathroom. And because I was able to tuck it in on two different sides, I was able to get this really nice curve of the fabric. So that's a really easy way to go. And then what I did is I just turned the lights off in the room and I put a lamp over here. I brought a lamp from another room and I just shined the light this way so it would have one light source coming from the upper left, and I would get these really clear shadows. Another thing that I tried, which worked really well, this was a pillowcase. And I just took a stuffed animal, but you could use any kind of medium-sized object, and I put it inside the pillowcase, and then again I arranged the fabric around so that I was able to get this nice curve here. You want to make the fabric do interesting things. You want to have it curving and folding and overlapping. So you really want to take the time to maneuver the fabric and not just, you know, put it out and take a picture however it happens to be. So this here, you can see here's where the stuffed animal was, and then the extra fabric I let just kind of flow off to the side and I arranged it. That worked really well. What didn't work well was hanging the fabric from one single point. So hanging it from like a doorknob or a hook on the wall. As you can see, because I only had that one point, the fabric just kind of hung straight down, and I really wasn't able to compose the fabric or do anything too special with it. So I don't really have such an interesting subject matter to work with. So these two techniques, hanging it from something with 2 points, like a bar, or if you had 2 hooks you could hang from, or wrapping an object and then letting the rest of the fabric kind of flow around the object, works really well. All right, so next, once you have your image, and you can either draw from life or you can take a photo, you want to make sure that you figure out your composition that's the same proportion as your 14 by 17 paper. So I'm just using my viewfinder right on my photo, and I'm going to hold it up and I'm going to play with the different compositions that I can make, looking for really interesting negative shapes and interesting folds in the fabric. So for example, if I do something like this here, I'm using that rule of thirds line, horizontal line right here as the bottom of my fabric. I have really interesting negative shape here at the bottom, another interesting negative shape at the top, and I have this kind of really interesting shadow that comes up through the composition as well. So something like that would work well. I could look at maybe using this peak here, maybe having that along the vertical rule of thirds, right? And then this creates an interesting negative shape along the right hand edge and along the top, or doing it horizontally, right? So here again, I'm using that rule of thirds to kind of decide where I'm gonna have that mountain peak, if you will, kind of coming up. So you can play with using the rule of thirds, even though you don't have a subject matter like a bottle. So for example, I could line up the top of the fabric with this top of this rule of thirds horizontal line here and get this really nice dip in the fabric. So that makes another interesting negative shape. Try to avoid compositions that have, you know, large areas of fabric that don't have a lot of variation of value. Like in here, it's all in shadow. It's not that interesting to look at. It's a lot more interesting on this side of the composition, or at least I have a lot of variation and a lot more folds. But this is a lot more interesting than either of those other two options. So look for interesting folds, interesting places in your fabric, and look to use the rule of thirds to create an interesting composition, and then you'll be ready to start drawing.